I'll tell you what, I think it's 10 past. I think let's get this show on the road.
Let's do it.
So yeah, welcome everyone. This is the first in our talks in our lecture series of it's called Sikhi in the Professional World. Kind of the whole process behind this is to kind of just interrogate the idea of professional and to kind of bring in people who kind of come from a different, maybe sort of unorthodox perspectives and talk about how Sikhi has sort of been guiding their journey. Just before I go over some housekeeping things, can everyone please mute themselves, other than me and Shabd, just to kind of make sure there's no really distractions. And yeah, so kind of basic format will be, so me and Shabd will be talking for about half an hour to 40 minutes, and then after that we'll sort of open up the floor to questions. If anyone has any questions sort of during the talk or just kind of any ideas, please just jot them down in the chat before you forget them, just yeah, and we'll try and fit everything in. Otherwise, just other things, sort of, yeah, we'll be recording the event, just another sort of heads up. And if you're not comfortable with having your face on camera and being recorded, please feel free to turn them off. And otherwise, just want to give a warm welcome to everyone and thank you for pulling up. And then thank you to Shabd for agreeing to come through. We're lucky to have him. So yeah, just sort of a little, for the uninitiated and for those who aren't related to Shabd, a little introduction to who he is. So Shabd Singh Khalsa is a political organizer and advocate. He's worked with several leftist organizing campaigns and also was in the office with Bernie Sanders. And he's also here, and the reason why we brought him, he's also the host of the One podcast, which brings together scholars, activists, creatives, and historians from all across the world to talk about Sikh culture, religion, philosophy, and history and art. And yeah, so without further ado, Shabd, welcome. And yeah, do you mind just sort of giving us a little brief overview of the One podcast and kind of what the thought process was when you put everything together?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. This is really cool. I feel really grateful to be invited. And I also want to say what's up to my in-laws who are here from the UK. Lots of love. Thanks for coming out to support. Yeah. So the One podcast, we did a rebrand. It's now called The One with Shabd, just so you know. It's, I just feel very silly saying that, but it really started about 4 years ago when I was living in the UK with my wife, and I worked like a part-time kind of like remote job, and I had a good amount of time on my hands, and I was trying to think of ways to fill time and do something creative. And I actually started a podcast that was just very sort of random and aimless that is now defunct. And I think I did maybe 5 or 6 episodes or something like that. And it was called Culture Consumer. And it was sort of just about like whatever I was interested in that week. Talking about music, like I interviewed, some music, like hip hop producers that I connected with online, and I interviewed this Mexican DJ that I met when I was living in Mexico, and so it was just sort of all over the place. And I think I did one episode that was on it was just on Sikh history, and I think it was I think it still exists out there, like on my SoundCloud. And I actually don't remember all of the topics that I discussed, but it just got really positive feedback. I didn't have a lot of listeners at the time, but a lot of the folks really appreciated my approach and thought that it was a really interesting episode. So around that time, folks might be familiar with the publishers Kashi House, Paramjit Singh, Amandeep Singh Madra, and that whole crew, who are all lovely guys. And I'd befriended them just by chance. I think I went to the exhibition that they did at SOAS on Harmandir Sahib. I just happened to be in London that day. I was visiting England. I happened to be in London. We went, and it really was eye-opening in terms of looking at Sikh history, just in a different way than I'd been exposed to it previously.
Mm-hmm.
And I befriended them, and they were lovely, and we stayed in touch. I was after that exhibition, I lived in India for a couple of years, and so they would occasionally reach out to me. And I remember we did like a fun project where I took a friend of mine and I took a camera and a tripod, and we tried to recreate photographs of Harmandir Sahib that had been taken in like the 19th century or early 20th century. And we were trying to do like side by sides and stuff. And so, we were, we stayed in touch over the years. And after I did that podcast, I've known them, at this point, this is, having been acquainted with them for, a good three plus years. Paramjeet reached out to me and he just said, look, like you're good at this, like you speak well, and you ask good questions. It was an interview with Paramjeet. That's what it was. That was the episode. People loved it. And he said, well, why don't you just, look, whenever we put out a book or, we'd love, you could interview our authors. If you want to talk to other authors in the world of Sikh studies, we can connect them to you and stuff. And he was just very helpful in kind of helping me put together a structure for how I wanted to do things. And then he really sort of just was like, he just sort of helped me make like a basic framework in the very beginning. And then he just was like, off to the races. And really that was actually, I haven't talked to Paramjeet in years, unfortunately, because he's a lovely guy. But literally that was sort of like the last kind of bit of interaction that we had around the show. And after that, it was sort of on me. And I would say, in between that time and when I actually released the first episode, which was on Shabd Singh's book, 1984, India's Guilty Secret, which is, for folks who haven't read that book or aren't familiar with the work, it's a revelatory book on the November pogroms in Delhi and around India of 84. That, I mean, just, if it wasn't already clear, the orchestration that the state, the way that the state orchestrated a genocide against Sikhs, this book really gave it the sort of academic and journalistic underpinning to just make it plainly clear how the Indian state acted to kill Sikhs systematically. And in that process, between kind of setting up the show, inviting, a bunch of different authors and stuff, and then the actual time that I recorded and then released that episode, I went through a pretty big political transformation. That was kind of in the preceding months after Trump had won the US election. And that was a big moment for me, because I'd always felt a sense of, or a desire to sort of fight for justice, but I felt like I didn't really have any kind of a framework or analysis to manifest that. And then when Trump was elected, it really made me start just asking a lot of questions. And a friend of mine, just by chance, sent me a podcast that was by some leftists that were doing, they're just very basic kind of analysis of capitalism and the structural nature of its oppressive structural nature, and the way that it works, and how the way it works manifests myriad social problems. And it made a lot of sense to me. This basic idea that environments shape lives, and that environments can be deterministic. Nurture is much more important than nature, I think, when it comes to how people behave. And I think that, resources are kind of at the basis of that. And that to me is something that absolutely aligned with Sikhi, in that as Sikhs, we provide resources to whoever needs them, regardless of any social or other designation. We just believe that people deserve dignity, full stop. And that comes from Gurbani. We don't need an analysis for that. That's just truth. So when I saw this analysis that was saying, well, when you don't justly share resources and you create this system where a very, very small amount of people dominate every facet of life just by nature of them having capital and access to capital and being able to increase that capital, everybody else is going to be subject to various forms of degradation and social ill. And that made a lot of sense to me. And so my politics really went from being kind of generally progressive, believing that the poor deserved more and that, there shouldn't be oppression and things like that, to, explicitly like a socialist in terms of the way I think that reorganizing our politics and economy could benefit the most people. And then that was a lens that I was trying to look through and trying to find information on when I was endeavoring to do this podcast. So I wasn't seeking to make like a Sikh socialist podcast. I wanted to make a Sikh podcast that asked questions from this kind of materialist lens of, trying to look at these broader structural, political, and economic questions in the context of the Sikh experience. And I think that created a lot of really fruitful conversations, and that was kind of the impetus of the show.
No, that makes a lot of sense, I guess. Yeah. So kind of building off of that then, did you have anyone, kind of a particular type of person in mind then when you approached the podcast? Kind of who was your sort of audience? Who do you think you were kind of making this podcast for?
I wanted to make it for Sikhs who may not have a political ideology that was grounded in material reality. And I wanted to make it for progressive, left-ish non-Sikhs who I hoped would understand the affinity that was clearly available between, these tendencies, these groups, in hopes to build some bridges between the two. And on the Sikh side, I saw a lot of Sikhs who were sort of interpreting our history and Gurbani in a way that, ultimately just like made like they were interpreting it in such a way that they were arriving at like very kind of right-wing conservative conclusions. And I disagreed with those. And I was hoping to create a discourse that would help people arrive at, seeing a Sikh politic as something rooted in abolishing tyranny and creating a just egalitarian social order, which is, to me, you don't want to conflate things, but I would say, broadly speaking, that is a project of many on the left. Now, there's a lot of contention there for reasons that we can discuss, and it's important not to oversimplify those or to wash over real history and tension between those between Sikhs and the left. But I think in terms of the goal of justice, that there's a lot there's a lot of fruit, it's a fruitful and worthwhile discussion. And I just, it broke my heart to see Sikhs interpreting Gurbani and arriving at, paleoconservatism. It's just, I do not read, that's not how I read our history and how I read Gurbani. It's just not how I understand it. And that's not how I, hear the interpretations of great, Guru Sikhs who know a lot more than I do either. I don't see them arriving at those conclusions. So yeah, I was hoping to create something in a vernacular, in a common tongue that was conversational, but and not even like overtly Sikh in our language.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make the language accessible to anybody, so that we could be talking about Sikh concepts, but that any person could approach and understand.
No, definitely.
Yeah, I feel like I trailed off in my answer.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But yeah, no, 100%. I feel like kind of that's something, yeah, you kind of come back to over the course of your podcast. And then one thing that kind of stuck out to me was that you were never sort of inherently prescriptive. It was always kind of about bringing conversations and asking questions. And well, do you feel like that's something sort of inherent to a podcast format? Do you feel like that's something you went out your way to do, or do you think that's just something that kind of opened up itself when it came to your approach?
Yeah, I think that it's more about, I don't know, that's just my personality. I don't find prescriptive advice to be very useful for most people. I find that the best, the Guru Sikhs that I've met who have been the most sort of inspiring and like profound as just in human beings were people that arrived there on their, like not on their own, but they arrived there through their relationship with the Guru, not because they were following some, like not out of this sort of what I think of as like a colonial religiosity. There was a mystical relationship that was developed, and they arrived at the conclusion or at the, the place where they were through that relationship, through that contemplation. And, the way that I read Gurbani is that it's mystical in many ways, in that it's asking you questions, or it's posing situations where you're being asked to contemplate, right? It's not thou shalt not or thou shalt. It can be parable, it can be, it's poetry to be explored.
No,
I had Jvala Singh on my podcast, and he was talking about Guru Gobind Singh, saying that he was asked by young Sikhs, like, can you interpret this line of Gurbani? And he said, actually, he's like, no, you have to. It's about your relationship to it.
Wow.
And I think that's really powerful. I think that allowing people to have their experience without sort of this judgmental pressure will generate the most powerful Sikh.
No, I hear you most definitely. Yeah. And I think that's the kind of, yeah, like especially harking back when thinking about, Guru Sahib and how they sort of approach things. It was definitely kind of a very interrogative way of trying to sort of understand and deconstruct sort of ideas and social systems, and then kind of arrive at conclusions based on that interrogation, right? No, 100%. And yeah, I mean, and I feel like having a podcast or that format and kind of listening to people, taking ideas and discussing things, I guess, is one way to approach that. But do you feel like there's sort of limits to a podcast format? Do you feel like there are conversations that you want to have, or things you want to sort of arrive at that are necessarily sort of that you're sort of limited to by your medium?
Yeah, I think that podcasting is not writing a thesis, I mean, that's like if you really want to get even deeper into these questions, writing, I think, is something that I want to do more of. I wrote the first article I've written in a long time for Boz recently. And I think that writing is another step further, but it doesn't have the same appeal for a person to just pop their headphones in and while they're doing their dishes or whatever, they can't listen to your thesis. So yeah, I think that there's depths of interrogation that maybe you can't go to, depths of nuance, breadth of topics, unless you end up just making 6-hour podcasts, which I don't think people would really listen to. They might, but I guess that's one limitation. But I would say that it's pretty damn good. It's a pretty good medium because you can go long and you can do 2 hours if it's a really good discussion. And when you're interviewing high quality guests who really know what they're talking about and they're able to reference things and stuff, you can get that same depth of like academic rigor in terms of citing your ideas and not just like kind of engaging in conjecture and whatever you think. And so that I think is quite good, but I think writing would be sort of the next step,
Okay.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. So, but kind of with the podcast almost, I guess it's kind of, at least for maybe the uninitiated, to actually sort of begin those interrogations, right? It's sort of like a step along the process.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, that's how I got into so many things that I'm interested in now, is listening to people talk about it. And it's natural. It's much more human, or to hear voices and I think it's more engaging.
No, most definitely. So kind of reflecting on that and kind of that ability, what conversation do you think has sort of like challenged your understanding the most, or kind of really kind of brought your thinking out the box the most? Not to put you on the
That's
spot or
tough,
anything.
man. Yeah, that's tough. I don't know if it's any of my episodes. I think that, I don't know if it's any of my episodes. Somebody that I really want to do an episode with is Harvey Singh from, Noljwani.
Yeah.
Him and I have had conversations a couple of times, and, he was raised in this very unique context where, his family were all involved in the Sangharsh of, the 80s and the 90s. Like, they were deep in that. And, live in, he grew up in the UK, immersed in that context, and immersed in an analysis of, phenomena in our world, politics, etc., that is rooted in Gurbani. And him and I have talked about that, and we've been talking about doing an episode for a long time, but it just hasn't materialized yet. And I look forward to that conversation, because every conversation I've had with him has definitely stretched my understanding. It's orthogonal to what I normally read. Yeah, so that's definitely something that I want to learn more about, is this sort of analysis of politics, etc., through Gurbani that he and people around him, or that he grew up around, that taught him, use, which is something that I don't know a lot about. And that's something that's very interesting to me. I mean, in a different way, the episodes that I did about 3HO were, I had, just before I did those episodes, I did a lot of research, and those conversations were really great, and I wasn't necessarily surprised or like stretched, but I definitely learned a lot of new things in the process of creating that. And I interrogated a lot of things about my own life, growing up in 3HO, being around Yogi Bhajan and being in the institutions that he helped create, that when I was going through the process of researching that, gave me perspectives, new perspectives on things that I thought that I was very familiar with.
Mm.
And that was really challenging because it's so close to home.
No, definitely.
You know, so yeah, I would say that, and people responded really well to those episodes, I think, for obvious reasons. So yeah, I think that would be one of my kind of most intense experiences preparing an episode.
No, 100%. I mean, like, just to be able to like have to marry, I guess, your lived experience with all these kind of new things you're reading and the kind of depth of research, or even just to kind of look at your lived experience from the perspective, from like the kind of distance perspective of like an academic or historical sort of like view. That must be really interesting to kind of like, yeah, to compare those two perspectives with each other.
I mean, it's kind of therapeutic because if you start to understand your life less about through the lens of just you as an individual, and you start to look at your life of you as part of something bigger and more complex, and you start to see the structural patterns that have affected your own life, it helps sort of depersonalize things. And I don't know, I think it definitely helped me cope a little bit with all of the realizations about Yogi Bhajan's multitude of abuses, and sort of the facade that we grew up in, and where a lot of, I think, my cohort really kind of dealt with, you know, I think a lot of people had crises in their identity, and this is not a knock against anybody. I mean, growing up in that community, and then like having Sikhi so closely attached to your relationship with like 3HO and Yogi Bhajan and all of this kind of stuff, like you're going to go through a crisis of identity. But for whatever reason, like I felt very comfortable in my identity as a Sikh while analyzing and being totally critical of my history and of growing up in the community. And I think it's because the way I see the community, way I see Yogi Bhajan is not much different than your average capitalist. Abusive, controlling, powerful, accumulating resources, manipulating social situations around them to maintain power, and then all of the perversions that go along with that, sexual ones in particular. Controlling of women, the abuse of women, children, you know, protecting other people who have your proclivities, because if they're discovered, then when might you be discovered? I mean, you know, why is nobody going after, I guarantee you nobody, Donald Trump is not going to jail, and nobody around him who's very powerful will probably go to jail either, because if you send him to jail, then you probably have to start looking at people in the Democratic Party as well, because they're all up to the same stuff. And I think that Yogi Bhajan is no different. He's just a powerful guy that was trying to maintain his power. He created an ideology, blending Sikhi and whatever the hell he wanted, to suit him and to put him in a position of power. And so it's like, or to maintain his power. And so when all of this stuff came about, I think I was able to look at it in a less personal context and a bit more of a structural one. And it helped me in a way, just sort of understand what I'd been through, instead of sort of putting it all on like me and my identity and my relationship with Sikhi, for example, that I think sometimes we have a tendency to do when we're focused a lot on the individual.
No, definitely. I guess kind of going back to that, it must have been, yeah, that kind of reason why it was therapeutic to be able to sort of unpackage that in a space where you could decenter your own experiences. No, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just kind of another note on housekeeping. Kind of, we're gonna continue on with this kind of structured conversation. But if anyone's got any questions that they want to raise or that they've been having, please, this time now is kind of allotted to kind of, you know, questions from the floor. But yeah, I mean, I would also just carry on as well. No, definitely. And kind of one episode of the one that I've always been reflecting on, is probably one of my personal favorites, is the one with Sonny Singh. You know, the jazz artist from New York, I believe. Yeah, and it was a kind of a fantastic conversation about kind of the relationship between music, art, Sikhi, and political organizing. For a little, for those of you who don't know who Sonny Singh is, he's a jazz artist who worked with a band called Red Barat, and now he's in a solo career. All of his musics have been sort of jazz interpretations of Shabd. Not you, Shabd, good money.
Just all jazz interpretations of me and my personality. Yeah.
No, and it was a fantastic conversation just about kind of talking about the role that music can play and art can play. And I just kind of wanted to kind of reflect on that conversation a little bit about the relationship between music and political organizing. And I would, what kind of reflection did you take away from that?
I love that episode, and Sonny is. I've yet to meet him in person, but he is just a lovely, lovely guy. Yeah, I love that episode too, and I was really inspired by, that he found solace in learning music in Gurbani when he was just like a one Sikh among. I think he lived in a primarily non-Sikh, I think primarily white or other communities neighborhood, and he just didn't have a big sangat around him, and I think he found a lot of solace in music and Gurbani, which is a theme that's actually come up multiple times on the show. I also did an episode with a wonderful writer whose name is escaping me right now, who wrote this sort of fictional book about Guru Nanak's life and journeys with Madonna, and she went through terrible tragedy and found solace in just learning and singing Gurbani. And so there's something about this Gurbani stuff that I think is pretty good. I'm not sure what it is. But no, I mean, it was, at first it was a testament to that, and like the sort of inner strength that it provides. And again, it's this mystical thing that is, it's difficult to explain with sort of this rational, intellectual perspective. It's mystical. It's profound. It's something that cultivates a certain peace that is difficult to describe. And then that being sort of the root and the kind of base that he goes from into continuing into his life, often, as an kind of outsider in different contexts, growing up outside of a Sikh community, in the Sikh community, he's even feels a bit like an outsider. And then he goes and he gets involved in like an organizing school, and takes like goes to like a camp basically and learns how to organize, and he does it. And it creates such a, I was really just kind of in love with like this sort of the love that he had for humanity, and the sort of the grounding in love that his politics have. And to me, like, that is the ultimate core. I mean, I that should be, I think, I'm going to get prescriptive. Love should be at the core of your politics. Real love, like real truth, universal, unconditional, ecstatic love is the root, I think, of real, like, revolutionary politics. And I think he just had that for whoever he met. And I can't help but think that, focusing on Gurbani at the core of his journey was a part of that. And then, of course, you have his whole foray into Red Barat and another group that he was a part of before that, which is making, I think, again, it's ecstatic music. It's not Gurbani, but it's some of it's Sufi inspired, some of it's just folk inspired, and then mixing in like New Orleans jazz and funk and all this kind of stuff, and which is music of the downtrodden, and music that comes from, that's hopeful music that comes from hopeless situations, which can only be created by love. You know, I mean,
No,
it's the only sustaining thing in those kinds of situations. And I thought that really came through in his character and in that story. And so I think, yeah, I don't know, that's my ramblings and ruminations on that episode.
no, definitely. I mean, like that, what you said there about kind of hopeful music coming up, hopeless situations, kind of, yeah, that really kind of stuck out to me, especially looking at sort of our Sikh traditions, for example, of Dadivars and looking at how we have this very kind of boisterous, very kind of bombastic music tradition about, and then not only about galvanizing strength, but also just about fostering community in bleak situations. Um, so yeah, I just want to pivot a little bit to talk about what's going on in Delhi right now with the Kisan Mazdoor Morcha, and kind of I wanted to ask you about how kind of do you see sort of the role of art playing into effect in this kind of political struggle?
Oh man, it's so amazing. It's so beautiful to see this sort of, again, yeah, sporadic, kind of ecstatic artistic expression. You know, I just saw like a little video of a bunch of babas like dancing in the street
Mm-hmm.
with smiles on their faces after they'd literally all just gone on like a morcha where people were being beaten. I mean, they're
Mm-hmm.
just like jumping around in ecstasy. And I was like, damn, like what makes those people, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Um, that was a very beautiful image. But clearly art is, I mean, it always has been. I mean, you know, before circulars and newspapers, you know, we had the in Punjab and in India, you had bards, butts, who would go around and play music and tell people what was going on, you know. And of course, nowadays we have instant communication and everything, but like that spirit is still there of like telling your story in that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's very powerful. It's very inspiring, and it's really cool to see. You know, there's still criticisms we can make about Punjabi singers, like who are who are doing these really cool songs about resistance to the government and about you know, standing up against tyranny. Uh, they're dope songs. We love them, and it's really cool to see kind of the mainstream like expressing itself this way in a way that it has not in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Of a real sort of oppositional um, voice, you know, in popular culture. It's really cool to see, but then unfortunately, they're still like singing about being Jat. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, there's still work to do there.
Yeah, there's levels, I guess.
Yeah, there's levels. So I mean, it's encouraging, but you know, come on, let's eschew that part of our thinking,
Mm-hmm.
because it's, I mean, part of the power of this protest is that it's not Kisan Ekta, it's Kisan Mazdoor Ekta,
Mm-hmm.
and Mazdoor implies Dalits, workers who are landless, and who don't have the same kind of stake in land, but rather simply maintaining their lives
Mm-hmm.
through labor. And the fact that they've come together is what makes it powerful. So, so if any, you know, if what's his name? Who's the one? If Gippy Graywall is listening, uh, you got to take the Jut word out of your mouth. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, it's beautiful. It's incredible to see. I mean, these videos too of like people just like sitting in Sangat singing Satnam Waheguru, Ram Ram, Allahu Allahu, like it's beautiful, man. I don't know. And it's very it's built in, and it's like it's so cool that Punjab has that and that
Mm-hmm.
India has that. Because I was thinking like, what would we do here, like in America, like if we were doing like a sit-in like this, would be doing like Party in the USA or something like that. Like, what's our folk tradition? You know, like what that we have in common.
I'll
I
break out the
participate.
Guthrie.
I mean, yeah, we do have it. Like it's there, but it's. I think America, we're so much further down the line of being alienated from each other socially in certain
Mm-hmm.
ways, whereas in Punjab a lot of people still have common experiences through their labor and their lives that they and a rich cultural heritage that hasn't been completely ripped apart by neoliberalism, that there's more in commonality. And, you know, somebody can pick up a tune of some folk song and like half the people there know it and can start singing it. Whereas like if I started singing Woody Guthrie with a bunch of Zoomers, you know, at a protest here, they would be like, what, you know, is that Little Pump? I don't know.
Fair enough. I'm going to pivot a little bit here and kind of answer some questions that have been popping up in chat. The first one's from Dalmeet Singh. As someone whose viewpoints are out in the public, do you receive opposition or get challenged on your viewpoints? And if so, how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I just tell them, I just usually send them a picture of my middle finger. No, I'm just kidding. No, I do. And in the past, I could get very defensive and argumentative. And I used to air that kind of stuff out online. And, you know, I went, when I was first starting to like create an online like profile, I was also going through a lot in my personal life where, you know, without going into details, I was very frustrated with wealthy people and anybody who didn't understand my politics. I was just like, I just felt like you're worthless, like you don't care about humanity. Like I just would jump to all these conclusions that were really bad faith and really just about kind of my personal animosity. And I would argue and all this kind of stuff, and it's totally fruitless. I mean, it's so meaningless to do that. The online discourse is really like in that way is meaningless. And then I don't know, over time, I just, especially when I started to actually work in politics, like when I was on the Bernie Sanders campaign and I actually was doing like political advocacy where I had to talk to people from every spectrum of, you know, the Democratic Party, which included your centrist, you know, kind of neoliberal types to your socialist types. You have to be able to talk to anybody. And I also just learned that like, if I really believe that people's environments inform their perspective and their lives, then I have to apply that to everybody. I can't just jump to conclusions about anybody who disagrees with me. And I understand that people don't have the same experiences as I do. They don't have the same reading as I do or whatever. And, you know, people are socialized in different ways. And so I just tried to apply my own, what I preach, you know, of love at the root of your politics to actually try to live that a bit more. And so I try not to like fight with people online. And when people disagree with me or they point something out or, you know, even if they're kind of a jerk to me, I just try not to react in like I try not to be reactive. I try to, when people are doing something in good faith, I try to engage with it. If they prove me wrong or something like that, I'm totally okay with going, okay, it's something I need to read more about. And yeah, I don't really get into, I don't really get into that kind of stuff anymore. And I just try to be humble and I like know that I don't know everything. And I know that I have so much to learn and people have much more reading than I do on a breadth of topics that I've talked about. And, you know, simple as that. You know, I'm not, I think it's only like if you're trying to protect your own ego that you get into those kinds of traps. And I've just been through that too many times that I just feel like it's not really worth it. And that you can learn a lot more if you're a bit more self-effacing and kind of like not up in arms about people disagreeing with you, you know? So, and I've learned a lot more. I've had a lot more fruitful conversations with people that I might not otherwise engage with. So yeah, it's, you know, stop internet beef. It doesn't do anything. It's a waste of time. Most of everything that we do on the internet is a waste of time. like the best thing that we can be doing is like studying and like organizing amongst ourselves, you know.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. And kind of okay, so moving on to the next question here. You kind of touched on it briefly. What was your experience working on Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign? Maybe you can kind of give us just a brief kind of overview of that.
Yeah, I mean, it was amazing and also hellish.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, you're working 16 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week. Um, just living and breathing work.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing because you're sustained by the work that you're doing and what you're working for. And in that case, you know, I don't think I could ever work on another presidential campaign unless it was another Bernie type person.
Mm-hmm.
Because the amount of energy and stress that it puts on you in your life, I mean, not just me, but my wife and just my family, it's only worth it if it's for somebody like Bernie who's actually going to do something constructive. Um, you know, if I had killed myself working for Joe Biden, I would not look back on it fondly, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it was an amazing experience. I learned so much about how that world works, about digital organizing, which is kind of my main career, um, you know, skill. And I also got to work in political advocacy for the campaign, which was amazing because, you know, what you're trying to do as a political operator for a presidential campaign is, like, my job was, I had like a portfolio of several states, and I was just calling up and down everywhere from city councilor all the way up to, you know, state senator, um, and you know, trying to get their endorsements for the campaign. And so you're having all of these, like, you know, some people won't even give you the time of day.
Mm-hmm.
But there are a lot of people who are just like, well, I like Bernie, but XYZ. And so you have to work with them and you have to figure out creative ways to sort of, you know, get them the answers that they need or the assurances that they need to support you. And you
Mm-hmm.
have to show up for them when they need you for something, and then vice versa. And you have to know how to kind of manage these relationships. And the cool thing with the Bernie campaign is that you could be really genuine. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
weren't, there was no like mincing words, you know, because his platform was so clear in terms of the policies he was pushing for, that you could maintain a strong line in terms of your position on things,
Mm-hmm.
but knowing how to like reach people from that position and bring them towards you is a skill that was really beneficial, rather than what I think a lot of political departments and campaigns are, is the candidate themselves calling up friends for favors and, you know, saying, I'll work with you on this or I'll work with you on that. Bernie wasn't like that. He didn't talk to any politicians, really.
Mm-hmm.
He just campaigned. He just went out to rallies and talked to people.
No,
And
definitely.
so, yeah, so we were kind of we were doing his job in a certain way. And it was very, very interesting, very exciting, met a lot of incredible people who are really righteous and, you know, fighting for the right things. And I loved it. It was a very cool experience.
No, definitely. Seems like a lot of kind of the work you've been doing is was always around sort of engaging with people in good faith and really asking kind of really deep, integrative questions. It looks like kind of that's quite a unique theme. I'm gonna kind of take. I'm gonna answer this. Ask this one last question. I'm just being mindful of time here as well. So
I
from
have
Diljit
time, by
Singh.
the way. If you're on a constraint, cool. But if not, I'm down to stick around if people are interested.
Okay, San. So let me ask from Diljit Singh. What was the police reaction to you when you were on the BLM marches?
Um, no particular. Honestly, the police here didn't really pay me any mind. I wasn't involved in any of the protests that got like tear gassed or kind of kettled by the police.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but other people's reactions to me were cool. I mean, I would go out, Sukhmani and I, my wife and I would go out and we made these cool posters with like, you know, 6 for Black Lives, 6 for Black Power, Black Lives Matter, you know, these kinds of slogans. And we just wanted to be out there in solidarity.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I was wearing my Dastar and, you know, and it was just cool. Like we would just kind of have these little connections from person to person that were very sweet. But yeah, the pigs never give me any trouble.
Fair enough. I mean, I guess yeah. There's been a myriad. Like I know sort of an Amritari Benji who's had sort of a less favorable experience, and I guess it kind of varies as well. I mean, kind of homogenized. I mean, there's the Republican take that they're just destroying cities, just full stop. I mean, whatever that means. But there's also kind of that the kind of myriad, right, of coverages, and I'm sure it differs from place to place. But nah, okay. And let me I want to ask kind of another question. Is kind of one I was thinking of as well. Kind of, what would your young Sikh, someone who's probably our age, and who sort of is going wants to sort of get into something creative like this, get into sort of podcasting or any sort of creative endeavor. What kind of would what would your advice be to them, and kind of steps you'd want them to take?
Well, you know, something that I haven't really been able to do, but that I wish I could have done more and more of is collaboration
Mm-hmm.
and building a kind of a collective. Like as much as you can, try not to isolate yourself, which is very hard in this day and age, but
Mm-hmm.
lean into collaboration and building some community around your creative work so that
Mm-hmm.
you have a reference point and you have a reflection so that you can in like a real good faith. And I think that's a very powerful tool for developing creativity. I did get some experiences like that, like in college, but that's something that I crave myself. And if I that now, but like if you can really develop that kind of like feedback loop where you're really creating with others and looking at each other's work, I think that's really powerful. I would say too, like, get to know yourself as best you can.
Mm-hmm.
When you're young, a lot of your thoughts are not your own.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of your thoughts are thoughts that are put there for good or bad reasons. You know, it's not to judge parents or anything like that, but a lot of the times when you're young, your thoughts are not really your own. They're your family's or your parents. And we should, you know, respect our parents and all of that, but definitely get to know yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And you might find conflicts there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think those are good things to explore and to be honest with yourself about. And they'll help you express yourself in a way that's more clear and more effective.
Mm-hmm.
And the last thing I would say is lean into the guru, like trust that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
however it goes. If you're not a Qatar, you know, go to Sikh right now. Don't feel guilty. Don't feel ashamed. If that's not somewhere you want to go, that's okay too. But maintaining a relationship with the guru and the values of the guru will never fail you. It will
Mm-hmm.
not. It will not fail you. And it's the only. I feel it's the only reason I've done anything in life is because, regardless of how close or far I felt to like my Sikhi, my practice, I felt that I truly believe that the guru is ever present, and that
Mm-hmm.
if you maintain that mystical relationship with guru and the values of the guru, that you will be guided into positions that are an expression of your sort of deepest, most loving self. Because you're going to be striving for being more compassionate. You're going to be striving for being of service. You're going to be striving for things that really matter in life. Whereas losing that anchor, it's extremely easy to get pulled in. You know, we're talking about professional, like Sikhi and professional life and all this. I could go get a job making six figures if I, with not a lot in between me and that, like there's a few things I would probably have to do, but I could make a lot like more money doing something horrible with my connections, with my expertise, et cetera, in politics. If I was willing to just sell myself to, you know, a lobbying firm or some political organization that works for business interests, for example. But I can't do that because, you know, then I just would feel, I would feel disconnected from the truth, like what I feel is the truth. And so whatever avenue you're going into, maintain that connection with the Guru. And I think that it will guide you to express, it will guide you into a truly creative space that is, that cultivates like love and good things around you.
No, definitely. Um, no, that was very well put. Um, yeah, and if there aren't any more questions in the chat, I feel like that would be a fantastic place to wrap things up, in all honesty. Yeah, thank you for everyone who pulled up. Thank you, Shabd, for joining us. Thank you, Shabd's family as well. For those of you who want to engage more with Shabd's work, I'm going to drop a link to his podcast in the chat just now. And also, sort of like before we end as well, I just wanted to kind of let everyone know that kind of our local Gurdwara is also doing a fundraiser to do some renovations work. And I'm just going to drop that link in the chat as well, if anyone would like to just sort of contribute towards that. But otherwise, yeah, again, just it's not quite a building fund, but yeah, there actually are some like quite needed renovations. But yeah, just a deep big thank you to everyone for coming on, and this will be the first talk of many that we'll be holding. So please do come back for more. And yeah, and again, just a big thank you and a big thank you for Shabd. Yeah.
My pleasure.
So we'll take some time and we'll see you guys soon. All right, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.